Welcome everyone. I'm Nancy Bronstein. I'm a Viking educator, and today I'm here to tell you about how I quilt with my serger. Now, a lot of people don't realize that their serger could actually be a nice tool to have as a quilter. And I'm going to go over the things that I use it for in my quilting. Most people think of sergers probably first and foremost to be great for sewing knits and stretchy fabrics, which of course it is. And I have recently started using minky for some quilts for my new grandchild. So that's how one of the ways that I use it is with the minky, but also there's other things. And I think that particularly one of the things I'm going to show you today, you are going to adopt and be really glad that you watched the class today. So the first thing that I'm going to talk about is my favorite decorative stitch in the serger. Sergers are generally, they are decorative stitches because you can use much thicker thread, decorative thread in the loopers, and the thread can give your project a little bit of added bling. And but a lot of the stitches are more utilitarian. The serger sews very, very fast. It creates a finished seam, and does a lot of specialized tasks that sure you could do with your sewing machine, but it will be easier and better with the serger. They both have their places. Your sewing machine does certain things better and the serger does certain things better. So I'm going to go over some of the things that I use a serger for in my quilting life. So probably one of my favorite stitches is the flat lock stitch, and I'm going to start with that. So the flat lock stitch is one where it kind of looks like, some people call it the ladder stitch. It actually can be utilized so that the ladder, the part that looks like a ladder, is on the right side of the fabric. Or if you're using decorative stitches in the looper, you could actually turn it around and have those decorative stitches, the looper stitches, show as you're on the right hand side. I prefer the ladder side. So I'm going to show you that stitch. So I'm going to switch my camera over. Right, today I'm using the Admire Air 400, which is our air threading serger. We have two air threading sergers. This is the more economical one. We do have actually the Admire Air 600, which came out just recently. And that is computerized. It's an air threader, and that really is a very nice serger. This is a nice serger for the price point. If you can afford a little bit more, the Admire Air 600 is really worth looking at because it is a really nice serger. So, but today we're going to use the 400. So this is the 400, and I do have it set up for a flat lock stitch, 3-thread flat lock. I have 12 weight thread in my sewing needle, and I have an attachment here that's one of the optional attachments for the Admire Air 600. Now this attachment, I don't know of any other serger that has it. There may be a serger that does, but I don't know of one. It is a cloth guide. So it goes into a slot here, and you can adjust this guide here left and right so that your fabric is helped along so that it's actually hitting the knife or not hitting the knife right where you want it to be. So you have the seam that you're looking for. And so I'm going to do a little flat lock stitch and show you what I mean by a flat lock stitch. So I'm going to put my foot up and get my fabric in here. I have my cloth guide set so it's right where I want it to be, so that I'll have a consistent seam. Put my foot down and then start sewing. Oh, I hit the foot control for my sewing machine. That's not going to help with the serger. Now I just want to make sure that I have my layers together, which I do. As you can see, you can sew pretty darn fast, and that's only probably about medium speed. So this is the side with the looper thread. And if I had put a decorative thread in the looper, then this would be the right side of my project, and it would be a decorative look like that with maybe a metallic thread or something like that. I prefer this side, where when you pop it open, it does look kind of like a ladder. So you pop it open and then press it. You'll press that seam towards one side and the back, and you get this nice textural effect. With the thread that I have in here is a 12 weight variegated green thread, and I have here a sample where I used a blue variegated thread and put together various colors to get going on doing some Seminole piecing. And you don't need a serger to do Seminole piecing. However, serger, you sew so fast with the serger and you get this nice decorative effect. So I like to use it for this purpose, to do the Seminole piecing. And for those people who have never done Seminole piecing, I'll show you what I mean. With Seminole piecing, you generally have long strips of fabric like this. Actually, I should bring it closer to the camera so you can sort of see the ladder stitch. Maybe it'll be better over here. So I don't know if you can see the ladder stitch better on this camera, but it gives it a nice textural effect where the ladder is. So going back to my serger here, with the Seminole stitches or Seminole piecing, you cut long strips of fabric to speed things up. So you get long strips sewn together, either with a sewing machine or with the serger. Then coming over here, I have my long strips. What I would do, depending upon what pattern I'm going to do, I would cut this in small pieces like I have here. So I have my computer trying to tell me some things that I need to turn off. Otherwise, it's going to annoy me. Okay, so here are some pieces that I previously cut. You know, it was a long piece like this. And I cut these in 1.5 inch width strips. These strips are I believe 2 inches, and then this is 2.5. You want the outside strips for this particular pattern I'm going to show you to be 1/2 inch wider. And what you do is you take your strips and you line them up so that they are just slightly askew, like so, when you sew them together. So you keep going like that all the way across. Then once you sew them, you end up with something like this, except you'd have the points here. Once you sew them together, then you just cut off the points themselves. Then you have this really nice kind of diagonal checkerboard effect that could be the border of a quilt, or you could make it into a block. And hopefully on the camera, you can see the nice textural effect created by the ladder stitch. I'm going to show you a quilted jacket that I used Seminole piecing in. And where did I put it? Of course, it's under the whole pile of things that I want to show you today. So just hold on here a second. So some of you may have seen this in a previous class, but I have this quilted jacket, and I used Seminole piecing across in a few different areas, right? Like right here and across the top. So you make big strips, and then you can add them as accents to your quilts. So you just have them sort of as a structural unit that can be added wherever you feel like you need that kind of geometric repeating effect. Now, the other thing I like to do with, let's see, I got a question here. Can you show the back side one more time, please? I'm assuming you mean the coat. So here's the jacket, in case you're interested in more than just the Seminole piecing. Let's see if I can get it on here. So this was a central embroidery that I started with, and then just kind of built on it freeform from there, putting together different elements that I thought would riff off of the shapes of the flower, and adding the Seminole piecing, and on this side doing a similar thing. So let's see, I have another question. The serged pieces from the beginning of the flat lock piece. Oh, okay. You didn't want to see the jacket. Okay, so the serged piece, let's see which camera I can show this better on. So I've got this serged piece here. This is the front side, but if I had sewn it a different way, it wouldn't necessarily have to be the front side like this. I consider this the back side because I didn't use a decorative thread in the looper. But if I had used a decorative thread, then these would be, perhaps metallic, but definitely more thicker threads so that it would pop a little bit more. My preference is for this to be the right side with the ladder stitch. And this is a narrow ladder stitch. You can make it wider than that if you want. This is just my preference. Now, the next thing I like to do with this flat lock stitch, if you do a wider one, you can thread a narrow ribbon through there and make it a decoration by going under some loops and over some loops. I created a sample for today's class where I didn't use ribbon. I used yarn because I wanted a more organic effect, and I've seen a lot of people use ribbon. But with this is going to be a table runner eventually. With the flat lock stitch and using yarn, it gives it a kind of a really nice texture. If I can get it on the camera. So you can see that it gives it more of like an organic effect. And a lot of the design is just from that flat lock stitch and repeating colors. So let's get a better view of the whole thing. So I will, quilt this, put backing on it, of course, and quilt it, and then it'll be on our table at some point or other. So I'm going to show you how I do the yarn with the flat lock stitch. Let's see if we can get the camera over here. So it's pretty simple. I have the flat lock stitch. I take a big hole needle and see if I've got it under the camera. I do. So I'm going to just go under some stitches and then go over some. And you don't have to have a set pattern. I think it looks nice either with a really regular pattern or with a very, just random pattern. So you just get it through a few. And the stitch will hold that yarn in place. So, I think it just makes a really nice textural effect to your seams. And then what I'm going to do is on that table runner is I'm going to do some matchstick quilting, probably just to continue with this kind of geometric effect. But maybe I'll do something different. Not sure. So that's the flat lock stitch. Now we have a question. Will every serger do a ladder stitch? As far as I know, I don't know of any that will not. It's a matter of setting it up correctly and setting your tensions properly. And then if you like the effect that I had where you like the side where it looks like a ladder, I think it looks better if you use a higher weight thread. I'm using a 12 weight thread with those samples, and the 12 weight thread will go through the needle. Anything bigger will probably not go. I don't think it'll work through the needle. Usually for most machines, 12 is the limit for a needle. For the loopers, you can use bigger than that, like an 8 weight or perhaps a 6 weight. For those of you who don't know, contrary to what you would think, the lower the number, the thicker the thread. So like a 30 weight thread is much thinner than a 12 weight thread. And 12 weight threads now, there's all kinds of companies that sell them. They sell variegated, they sell all sorts. And I really like that in the flat lock stitch. Oh, and I was going to show you a quilt that I made using the flat lock stitch. So I got to move a couple things around here. So I made this top to this quilt with the serger, and the top was a lot faster than the actual quilting on the long arm. I used rulers to quilt it, but the actual piecing went really fast with the serger. So it's kind of a scrappy quilt, leftover Christmas fabrics. And basically, I used a red 12 weight thread, so you can see, and the flat lock stitch. Doesn't show up on the camera all that great. But see if I can get a real good shot of one of these squares. It's a queen size quilt, so it's a bit unwieldy. Okay. So what I did is I did a lot of, I had thin strips just like I showed you with the blue and green fabric, and I cut them on a 45-degree angle, and then pieced together, so it made like a pyramid shape, and then I pieced together random pieces to just form these scrappy blocks. You know, the lines don't meet up, but the red ladder stitch or flat lock stitch with the 12 weight thread, I think adds a certain something to it that I like. And doing the quilting with the serger went super fast. And I also made these prairie points with the serger. So those went pretty fast too. Okay, so now I'm going to switch gears and talk a little bit about making kind of like a different type of strip quilt with the serger. So I got to grab another sample. You can actually do the front and the back and the quilting kind of all at once with the serger. So the way I do that, this is going to be a small minky quilt for my grandson when it's all done out of scraps, and with the idea that it's a small quilt to put on over him when he's in his car seat. So it's literally a baby lap quilt. A lap quilt for a baby that's also kind of baby size. So I have made part of it already, and each of these rows is just one seam, and it's finished on front and back. And the way that you go about doing that is, get this set up here. At the end of the last piece, I've got gray on one side and the sea creatures on the other side. And I'm going to take, since it's gray, I need a sea creature strip. I'm going to take this strip and put it right sides together on top of the gray, and then do the same thing on the other side where I've got sea creatures. I'm going to put gray, so that both sides are right sides together. So when I've got those right sides together, so I've got, show this again, I've got my last piece that's right sides out. I'm going to put another piece right sides against that and right sides against this. So the last piece of the quilt is kind of like the cheese in the sandwich. And then I'm going to put a piece of bread on one side and a piece of bread on the other side. And if you remember that you put the fabrics right sides together, when I stitch that down and open it up, I will have just a continuation of this pattern. Now, the the challenge with minky is that there's two things, probably more than two, but right off the bat I think the biggest challenge is that given any opportunity, it's going to roll on you and misbehave. So if I were doing this with cotton, I might put a few pins in, but because I'm doing this with minky and I know it's going to want to roll on me, I've got clips pretty close together. You can use pins if you want. Pins are kind of not something that people like to see with sergers, because particularly with minky, if you have something that has a lot of loft, like it's furry minky, the pin could get lost in the minky, and then you run over it with your cutter and you're going to probably, you might wreck your cutter, and so it's not a good thing. So that's why pins are not generally popular in serging. But the clips are, you can see those and you're not going to run over those. So again, I have the last section on the other side, and I've got a matching strips right sides together, and I'm going to just I'm going to set this up with a 3-thread overlock stitch. I could use a 4-thread overlock. However, the 3-thread is secure enough for quilting, and it's just a little bit less thread. So that's probably a good thing, since we're already using 3 threads as it is. So I'm going to show you how I thread this machine, and tell you that I always feel like when I thread a serger on camera that it takes twice as long. I'm hoping that I won't be fumbling around here when I'm on camera threading the serger. Okay, so this is my Admire Air 400, and what I need to do, well, I got some crazy thread wrapped around my 12 weight. I want to get rid of the 12 weight, and so I'm going to find my scissors and cut that, and I'll have to rethread this. So just in case there are some of you that have not used a serger before, or this particular serger, I am going to go over how to thread it, show you how nice the air threading is. I'll tell you that once you have an air threading serger, you just never want to go back to a regular one. It's just, if you talk to anybody who has an air threader, they'll probably tell you that they use their serger more, and that they definitely change the colors more now that they have an air threader. So I'll show you how this one works. So I am going to cut this thread, and then I have to thread the needle because I had that 12 weight in there. So just bear with me. Oh, I need to actually play out the thread that I had previously, the 12 weight, by just going to give it some gas and get rid of the 12 weight thread that was in the head of the machine. So now I'm going to thread this. And I do want to have my foot up, just like with a sewing machine. If you thread a sewing machine or a serger with the foot down, the tension discs are closed, so your thread may not go between the tension discs, and then you'll have terrible tension. So I'm going to get this in here. And this particular serger does have a needle threader. And unfortunately, I cannot see if it is. There we go. Now I've got the threader actually in the hole of the needle. And it is a little easier to thread, I find, for me, because I have big hands, if I open this up. So I've got the needle threader engaged, and I put my thread across the needle threader. Like so, and then try to slowly bring it up. That was too quick. I have a camera right by my left ear, which makes it very awkward to actually get in here. Now I'm going to bring it up, and then it threaded the thread. Yeah, way too much thread there. Okay, so I have the needle threaded. I have previously taken out the other needle because I'm only doing a 3-thread stitch. But I'm going to show you how I would also, if I wanted to change the thread in the loopers, how I would go about doing that. So I need to get rid of one of the looper threads in order to show you the air threader. So I'm just going to cut that and run that out before I rethread it. So there is a safety feature with this machine that it won't stitch if you don't have the foot down. So I put the foot down. Okay, now we just have the lavender and the white thread. So I'm going to go back, and I've got this here. Get rid of that. Oh, actually, I'm going to just rethread that. So you can see the air threading. Then we'll move on to the next technique. So I have my foot up, so my tension discs are not closed. And then in order to use the air threader, hopefully you can see here, I have to flip this to threading mode, and then I have to close these tubes by turning the flywheel towards me. There we go. Now, I'm just going to thread this first looper. What I do is I put about 1 inch of the thread into that hole and then pull out some slack and bring this lever up. And I didn't put in enough in the hole. Oh, you know what it was? I didn't flip this switch. So you have to flip it to the thread that you're trying to get air threaded. Now it's threading. That makes sense. Okay, so now we've got that threaded, and it's just that easy. So much more easy than trying to get your big hands in there to get that thing threaded. Now I've got to flip it back to sewing mode and close this and put my tray back on. Put my glasses back on so I can see. And I do need to make some adjustments so that this is no longer in a flat lock stitch. So I'm just going to change my tensions up here. If you had the the Amber Air, okay, now I'm drawing a blank on which it is, but if we had the computerized serger, then our step up, the 600, then you would have all the stitches would be computerized, and it's just a matter of pushing a button, and then everything would be set for you. But with this more basic model, it does do the air threading, but you have to set your tensions. Okay, so let's just chain off, make sure everything is working here. Okay, got a good chain going. Now I'm going to put my minky under there after I get the layers behaving here. And use my seam guide, cloth guide here. And I'm not doing this quite as carefully as I normally would, just to get this done so you can see the end result. So I had this last piece, I put the right sides together, the bread on the cheese. And on this side, I put the right sides together, the bread on the cheese. And then when I open it up, I have another row where it's done on the front and the back. So then what I'm going to do is put a couple more rows on here, and I'm going to use some fuzzy minky on the sewing machine to do the binding, but that's for another class since I'll be using the sewing machine. Now I'm going to show you that's something similar that I did in cotton. So let's see. Well, I have a question. Can you adjust tensions on the 600? Yes, you're talking about the computerized version of the serger. There, you can adjust so many things on that particular machine. It will set the tensions for you automatically, but you can go in and change the tension on any like the needle thread or the loopers, whatever you want to change the tension on, you can by very small increments, as much as you want. And then once you get the stitch the way you like it, you can push the heart button and save it as your special stitch. So you don't have to do that every time. If you like a certain stitch done a certain way, you can save it, name it, and it'll be there for you the next time you go to it. But it will set them for you, by just touching the color menu, and generally the settings are good, but you may like things a little bit different. How many threads does the 600 have? It has 5 threads. So it also does, I'm sorry, the 600, yeah, this is the 400. The 600, the computerized version, has 5 because it is a cover stitch as well as a serger. And another question, how wide are your strips? What is the width range? My strips, I would say, are 4 to 5 inches. I tend to, with that stripping technique, I will vary them. I don't generally make them all the same size, although you could. You just have to have them matched front and back. So if you have a matched pair, then you'll be fine. It's just when you look at the quilt, there'll be some variety in the strips, but they may have to match back and forth, back and front, so that when they're sewn together to make that new seam, they meet. But you can make them all the same size, and that's probably easier. And so the width, just, as far as minimum and maximum, it's totally up to you, how many strips that you want to sew and the look that you want it to have. Another question is, looks like part of the seam is open, or was that an optical illusion? You have a very good eye, because I was not paying attention while I was sewing the minky. It did misbehave, and because I was talking and trying not to knock the camera, so I actually would go back and just make that seam a little over again. What happened was, let's see if I can pull it out here. This blue fishy fabric it curled inside, and it wasn't, all those 4 raw edges were not together in that one little spot. But when you open it up and you see that, you can pull out a few stitches and redo it, and it's fine. But like I said, minky, any opportunity, it wants to curl up, and it doesn't have like any kind of static cling like you would think it would, so that it would stay together. You can put the raw edges together, and then they want to shift, so you really have to watch it more carefully than I can do while I'm talking and avoiding the camera. Can you use batting between layers? Yes. With the minky, I don't feel like I need to because it's so thick. I'm going to show you a sample. This is going to be a placemat. This is the same principle, but it had batting in between. And I also did some match stitch quilting so that it's really, closely quilted. And you're going to do the same principle, but there's going to be a layer of batting. You're going to put you're going to make your cheese sandwich where you've got your right sides together on the front and the back, and you're going to, on top of the back piece or the front piece, I don't know why, but I tend to put it on the back, I'll put a layer of batting there. So then I'm stitching through 5 layers, And when I open it up, what I'll end up with is I'll have the batting on the inside and the right, the fabric right sides out, both on the top and the bottom. So just to say that again, when you line up your right sides together, you just put a layer of batting, and that will be on the wrong side of one of the pieces of fabric, so that once you stitch it and you open it up, you've got batting in between each layer. So you have to make batting strips in addition to your fabric strips, the same size as your fabric. How to fix the seam in the middle. I'm probably going to end up cutting off some on that seam in order to get, I'm going to pull out the stitches. And the reason why that seam is not closed is that all 4 pieces of the fabric, all the raw edges were together, but one curled in, and so it didn't get caught. So I'm going to open it up, and I'm going to pull that piece out so that now all the four layers are together again, the raw edges. And then I probably will shave a little bit off that seam. But, minky is kind of, this is not a show quilt. This is a casual baby quilt. And it's a very quick way to make a baby quilt. So that's how I would do it. And it really isn't a big deal to make that work. Okay, so that's that. Then, as I was saying, this was made in the same way. It does have batting on the inside. You can kind of see it on the edge. And I used the same method, except that I used cotton front and back. So it's more like a traditional quilting material, and it looks more like a traditional quilt. So what I want to show you now using this is something that I think for quilters, this technique alone is worth having a serger to quilt with. And what this technique is a way to very quickly put on your binding with fusible thread. So some of you may have never heard of fusible thread. I don't know how long it's been on the market, but basically what it is it's a specialized type of thread that is basically glue in a thread form. So I'm going to use this in the lower looper so that it is on the back side of my quilt, and you'll see how this can make it very quick to do your binding with the serger. So I have my binding, and I'm going to bind this piece. But I do need to now put the fusible thread in the lower looper. So you'll see the air threader again. Forgot that I should have just done that demo with the fusible thread. So I'm going to take this off, open this up, cut my lower looper, and then get rid of the purple thread by chaining off. So there's a lot of different brands that make fusible thread, and right now I'm using one of them, but they're all pretty, if you buy from a good thread company, they're all pretty good. So I'm going to put my foot up, and I'm going to turn it to threading mode. I'm going to close my tubes by turning the flywheel towards me. And I've got it turned to threading. Now, the thing with this fusible stuff is that the end wants to separate and kind of fuzz out on you, kind of like metallic threads. Like, I don't know if you probably can't see it on the camera, but it makes a big, almost like a brush on the end. So putting it through the looper is pretty tricky. And I do have a threader. It was here just a minute ago. So for those of you that have a serger that has threaders, they're very fine. And once you drop them on the floor, it is pretty hard to find them. So I did just have it here. in my tray, and now it is no longer there. So just bear with me for a moment. Hopefully I can find it quickly. And if not, I'll try to thread it without the looper using some thread. Okay. Okay, so the threader that comes with the machine is much easier to thread large diameter or things that have a fuzzy end through the air loopers. But since it fell on the floor, I'm going to have to improvise with a piece of thread by making kind of like a lasso on the end, which if you lose your threader like I did, this is what you do. So I'm going to make a loop on the end and then use the air threader to thread the unlooped end and use the loop to pull my fusible through the thread, through the tubes. Okay, so I'm going to turn the slider over to this side so that I'm going to stick my thread in there. I've got my tubes closed. And it went right through, but now I need to get my tweezers to get a hold of it. No, it actually didn't go through. Now it did. So now I have the end of that thread. I can take my fusible and put that through the loop on the end and pull it through the tubes. Because like I said, the end just fuzzes out and it gets caught and it doesn't want to air thread. But so this is a good thing to know to do because some threads that's just what they want to do for some reason. So now I'm going to pull it through. Now I have my fusible coming out through the looper, lower looper. Now I turn it back to sewing mode and close this. Okay, get this in place. And I'm going to use a 3-thread overlock stitch and show you how I do binding with the serger. Now, this will not create a competition style binding, but it creates a pretty nice end product. Pretty darn quickly. Oh, this is caught on here. We don't want that. Okay, so to start out, generally when you put, I have a question, where do you buy fusible thread? The stores that sell a lot of thread will probably have it, or the usual Amazon. I got mine on Amazon because I live very far away from any quilt store, but your local quilt store will probably have it. So in order to start, typically when you go to bind with the traditional way, you're going to leave a tail so that when you come around from the other side, you're going to overlap them and make it so that there's a really nice, almost invisible seam. With the serger, I do it a little bit differently. So, but I'm going to try to create the same effect. So I'm going to stick this under here in the middle of the seam. And what I have is my binding is, traditional binding, I would use 2 1/4. Right now I have 2-inch wide binding. If you start to use this technique, you'll find that you may change this slightly depending upon how thick your quilt is, because you want it to overlap just the right amount, not too much, not too little. So I start out by ironing a fold so there's a point, like it's pointing up towards the machine like that on the inside. And then I'm going to stitch that down. And I'm going to drop it on the floor first. So what I'm going to do is I am going to stitch this down, to about here, so that, and then I'm going to turn this over and start stitching the binding the normal way. What I'm creating is a area where when I come around the other side, when I finish up going all the way around the item, that I can stick the end in here, and then I'll have a nice, almost invisible join there. But first I have to stitch down this single layer of fabric. So put my foot down and start stitching. And I'm trying not to cut off any fabric, but there will be some of the, threads and maybe fuzz from the batting that will get cut off. But this cloth guide really helps to, keep things where they should be. So I'm just going to come down to here and then cut my thread, because I want to now take this and bend this over, lift this up, actually put my foot up, stick this in, and I want to start stitching from about there, and so that then now I'm stitching down both sides of the binding as opposed to a single layer. Now I want to make sure my raw edges are lined up, and then I'm just going to stitch down to the end. I got to put my foot down. We're not going anywhere. And I'm basically going to go right down to the end and go off. Then I'm going to open this up. I want to create a little bit of slack here with my thread, lift this up, and actually let's chain off a little bit more. Oh, it won't sew with that open. And I'm going to do a few corners so you'll get the idea if you can't see as well on the camera. So I went all the way to the end, and basically I'm going to do it just like I would make a miter the traditional way. I'm going to pull this up. Then maybe I can hold this up so you can see it better. I'm going to pull this up so that this is a straight line here, my binding and the edge of my fabric. Keep my thumb there, bend it over, just like I would if I was doing the traditional style. And having extra thread here helps a little bit. Get going again. So I'm going to lift this up and stick it in there up to the needle. And, I just pulled it out of place. Now I've done a lot of binding, so I'm used to not pinning it or anything. If you haven't, you probably want to take this slow. And now I'm going to start serging down this row. Okay, I have a question. Why can't you sew over the folded end itself? In other words, approaching the bevel instead of below the bevel. I think you'll see when we get to the end why I do it the way I do it. So let's just wait till we get to the very end, and then if you still have a question, ask it again. Now I see I should have been better about squaring this up, so that's not going to look too good, but we'll just keep going. So I'm going to sew off the edge, and then I'm just going to give myself a little bit of slack here. Put this back in here. Actually, it's probably a good idea if I cut this end off. And before I do the miter again, I'm going to point out that we've got the serger thread here, and then here's all the fusible thread on the back. And we are going to eventually bend this over, and we're going to iron that so that's ironed down. And the reason why you want to use a serger is that once that melts, that's really going to hold it down really well. If you just had a straight stitch like that on your sewing machine, it would not be enough glue, and I don't think it'd be as fast. So I'm going to pull my binding up to make my miter, bend this over, get the raw edges lined up again, bring my foot up, bring the fabric up to the needle, and put my foot down, start sewing, serging. Okay, why are you not serging now? Okay, now the serger, for some reason, is not getting the command from the foot pedal. And I've got the foot down. The light is on the serger, so we have power. Don't you love technology when it lets you down like that? Okay, let's take this out and do something where I can see things a little bit better and see if I can figure out why that's not serging. Oh, probably because that's not closed all the way. Let's see if that's what it was. Yep, that's what it was. It was a safety feature. Because this was slightly ajar, like that, and I didn't realize it. So that's why it wasn't sewing. See if there's any questions here. I don't want things to be real tight. I want to be able to do the miter easily. You know what I could do, actually, another reason why I would give myself slack is, I haven't done binding in a while, is, let me get this, I'll explain it on the next miter. So we're going to bring this up here and start to sew once I put the foot down. Oh, this one's not going well because I didn't get it in there well, but we'll keep going. So I give myself slack out of habit because instead of chaining off, what I could do is give myself some slack here and lift up and turn. But with the miter, I tend not to do that. So, but I can just pull it out now if I want and not cut. So now I've got my corner here, and I'm going to turn this up. I want to finish it so I can show you how I join at the end. Okay, last corner, and then I'll show you the grand finale. So I make another miter. Should cut this off because my scissors aren't that sharp. Lift up, put this in here. Okay, so I'm coming down to the end here. What I'm going to do is I am going to, the top piece, I'm going to cut it when it gets down to about here. That's where I want to, as long as I want it to be. Then I'm going to stuff this underneath here. And it helps to have something that is sharp like a stiletto or, you know, your tweezers to get that down in there well, like that. And then I'm going to just keep going. So now we have it all the way around. And what I'm going to do is I am going to, I would press this seam open. And because this is, you know, glue basically, you would want to press it on something that, you know, a pressing cloth. So I'm going to put my pressing cloth under. We're almost there. I know we're running out of time here. So I'm going to put that on there. And I'm going to press that open first. And might as well do this side. I'll just do one corner and show you, because we're running out of time. So I'm going to make my miter here and turn this around. I need to trim some stuff here. It's under the camera. So I'm going to fold this over so it's bent over the fusible thread, make my miter, press this down, and then I usually get the part that's next to the miter melted so that's holding it down. And then I kind of redo my miter to make sure it looks the way I want it to look. So this is held in place pretty well. Then what I would do, how are we for time? It's almost, time is almost up. Let me do just a little bit and then I'll show you how I finish this off. Don't really have time to do the whole thing, but at least I can do a corner. So of course you want a really hot iron. Okay, so I've got that corner stuck down. That's the back side. Here's the front side. Oh, here we go. So what I'm going to do is, this is the front side. I'm going to go and I'm going to stitch in the ditch, and you won't see it on the front, and then you'll just have a seam that just catches it on the back. So I'll do this corner and then show it to you. And then we'll have time for some questions, and then we'll have to end today's session. So let's see if I can get this sewing machine lined up here. So let's go in a little closer. There we go. So I am on the right side of my project here. Need to put serger out of the way. And I like to use the open toe foot when I do stitch in the ditch. I just feel like I can see things better. But you could certainly use a stitch in the ditch foot. Start by putting my needle down and then just sew across the ditch, in the ditch. Up. That was not what I meant to do. So you can see how quickly you could get a quilt bound with the use of the serger and the fusible thread. So this is the right side, and then the wrong side. And the camera's not great for detail, but I mean, you end up with a really nice finished product. You know, I've got a nice miter there, and it is a heck of a lot faster than doing a whip stitch on the back side. Okay, let's see if there's any final questions. Do you serge the outside before adding the binding, or would that be redundant and make the seam bulky? I would only serge the minky, because the minky is going to want to misbehave. So I tend to do a serging along the borders of a minky quilt, just to keep everything together, because it wants to curl away and misbehave. With the cotton and the batting, I wouldn't feel like I needed to do that. You know, it's so, unless it's very loosely quilted and things are, you know, not staying together for some reason. But this has the matchstick quilting, so it's, you know, they're pretty close together, and there's, you know, nothing's going to curl or do something it shouldn't do. And let's see. Oh, our staff want me to remind you that the Facebook Live has been recorded. So if you wanted to watch it later, or if somebody else you know wanted to watch it, it is available on the Facebook page, Husqvarna Viking North America Facebook page, as well as our YouTube channel. And you should actually go to YouTube if you haven't already and follow us so that you get notifications when there's a new YouTube going up. And okay, question, does the thread gum up the needle? No, it doesn't. And I am the kind of person that I'm not crazy about spray adhesives, and I tend to avoid sticky stabilizers and things like that because they do gum things up. So I am on the lookout for that, and I have not had that experience. Now we have a question, do you have to use a jeans needle to go through all that fabric? Probably on a lower end machine, that would be a good idea. I was sewing on the Topaz, and I probably would have benefited from a jeans needle for all that fabric. I typically sew on the Epic 2, and it just goes through everything. So I don't feel like I wouldn't need to with that quilt sandwich I was sewing on. But if you feel resistance, that would be a good idea to switch to a jeans needle. Because it would be have more penetrating power. But the Epic 2 has twice the piercing power of the Topaz. But the Topaz was smaller and fit right on my desk with my serger. So there's something to be said for that. I think that's all the questions. Thank you very much for joining me today. I didn't cover everything that I wanted to, but I think hopefully I showed enough of that binding technique that alone will be something that will intrigue you to try with your serger, and you know, let me know how it goes. So thanks again for joining me, and have a happy sewing. Oh, and actually Meredith wants me to mention before I hang up here that we have another Facebook Live coming on April 13th, Mickey is doing a Facebook Live on Explore the Quick Font feature. If you have the software and you haven't used Quick Font, you are missing out, and you should go and listen to Mickey because she's a lot of fun and very knowledgeable about the software, and that Quick Font is a really nice feature. So again, happy sewing. Thank you for joining me. Bye-bye.